Okay, we are live. Shaifali, you can
Great,
start.
great. Thank you so much, Abhijit, and thank you, all of you, for joining me today. I know we are in very unprecedented times here with coronavirus, and I hope you all are staying healthy and safe. But I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Shaifali Aggarwal, and I am the founder and CEO of Ivy Groupe, which is a boutique MBA admissions consulting company. And today we are going to be talking about how to stand out as a finance applicant when applying to business school. So very excited to share my insights with you today. And please also check out the chat box so you can see the benefits of joining as a YouTube subscriber for GMAT Club. So with that, really excited to get started. And throughout the presentation, it's really helpful if if you like things, if you hit that like button at the bottom of your screen. So let's jump in. And first, I will start off with an introduction of who Ivy Groupe is, and then a little bit on my background, and then get into the heart of the presentation. So who are we? So Ivy Groupe is a boutique MBA admissions consulting company that provides personalized and customized services to clients all over the world who are applying to business school. And I do want to stress that we are a boutique firm, which means that clients do work directly with me and get very personalized attention. Our mission is to help clients tell their story to business schools so that they can achieve their dreams and impact the world in whatever field that they are in. And I really do think that this philosophy that focuses on authenticity and storytelling has really helped my clients craft compelling and differentiated applications and gain admission to top business schools, such as HBS, Stanford, Wharton, MIT, Kellogg, Booth, Columbia, London Business School, to name a few. Now, with respect to my background, I am a graduate of Harvard Business School and Princeton University. I actually started my career in finance before going down more of an entrepreneurial path, which is why my rich and multifaceted career across industries and functions makes me extremely well suited to understand not only those who have a finance background like you, but also those who have other varied backgrounds who are applying to business school. So I did spend most of my career as a finance professional on Wall Street, where I worked in both the investment banking and the asset management industries at leading companies like JP Morgan and Neuberger Berman, which was the asset management arm of Lehman Brothers. And so definitely have a lot of perspective when it comes to working with finance applicants, having been a finance applicant myself as well. I also have experience working in the educational nonprofit sector and as an entrepreneur, founding an online media company. However, I've always had a very strong passion for education and feel very lucky to have had the opportunities that I did, which led me to launching Ivy Groupe and to where I am today. I have spent many years successfully coaching MBA applicants from all over the world to the MBA programs of their choice. And immediately before starting Ivy Groupe, I was Executive Vice President of Business Development and Strategy, as well as a Senior MBA Admissions Consultant at another bigger admissions company. At Harvard Business School, I had the unique opportunity to gain perspective on what the top business schools are looking for in candidates when I served as VP Admissions of the Women's Student Association. And in that role, I collaborated directly with the HBS admissions office as a bridge between current students and prospective and admitted students. I've also been a featured speaker, both domestically and internationally, on the QS World MBA Tour, have led many webinars on GMAT Club. You can find a lot of them just on the YouTube channel. And I have been quoted as an expert in US News and Business Insider multiple times. And I've been a contributor to Forbes, Entrepreneur, and The Economist, and The Muse. And I am also a member of the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants. So I have a lot of experience, a ton of experience with finance applicants, and I'm excited to share what I have learned over the years with you. So let's talk a little bit more broadly about finance candidates and the broader MBA landscape. So when we think of a finance applicant, there is unfortunately a stereotypical impression of who a finance applicant is and what they look like. And this is not true of anybody, but it's just sort of the impression that's out there of a finance applicant, which is why in your applications, it's really important to try to get away from that. So what is, or what are those stereotypical impressions of a finance applicant? So first off, there is this view that as a finance applicant, all you really just care about are numbers and crunching numbers and modeling and analyzing things. And so that you are very, very quantitatively focused. So it's never a bad thing to be good with numbers, especially for business school, where they really gauge your ability to handle the rigor of the curriculum through your quantitative and analytical abilities. But it can be or start to become detrimental if that's all that starts to come across in an application. And you know, I can understand where this impression comes from, right? If you think about finance applicants, and I think about my own roles working in banking and investment management, it was a lot of number crunching. It was running models, working on transactions, looking at you know, different deals that were going on, slicing and dicing different scenarios in a million ways. And so because of that, there is this ultimate impression that you are hyper competitive, that it really is about, you know, what are the, you know, how many numbers, what, you know, how many transactions have you closed in your career? And if you are in a hedge fund company or asset management, what have your returns, you know, been? Have you been able to exceed the benchmark? Have you been able to exceed competitors? So business school, while of course you are in this environment with very A-type people, and it can feel, you know, like a competitive environment, ultimately business schools are looking for people who come across as a bit more collaborative. And putting all of these things together, there's this impression that because finance applicants just care about the numbers and analyze things, and because they're hyper competitive, that they are dry and they lack empathy, that there are no human qualities to them. It really is just about, can they, you know, can they just be the, you know, kind of overtake everybody and not care about sort of, you know, the rest of humanity while they're doing that. And again, I want to stress, these things are not true of any finance candidates or clients that I've worked with, but it is the impression that often comes across. And then finally, there is this thought process that finance applicants really don't have any life outside of work, that they are, you know, in their offices 24/7, working evenings, working weekends, and just 100% just work, and don't really have any other dimensions to them. So why am I going through these impressions? Because very, very simply, the MBA application process is about displaying who you are holistically. And we're going to get into that in more detail. So now that you have a view or sort of this picture of what the stereotypical impression of a finance applicant is, let's take a look at how competitive the MBA landscape is and why it's really important to get away from that stereotype. So as this chart shows, the MBA landscape has never been more competitive, with the top two MBA programs, Stanford and Harvard, having acceptance rates of 6% and 11% respectively. And if you look at the top 7 schools, or the M7 as they are called, they have acceptance rates ranging from 6% to 24%. And so since this process is so competitive, and because you are a finance applicant, and there are a lot of you, it's extremely important to put your best foot forward when you are applying to business school. And that's where I hope to help you succeed. And so let's start off with how you can stand out as a finance applicant. And I'm going to go through multiple ways that you can start to do that so you get away from that stereotypical impression and really come forward as someone who is, very, very human in the process. So let's start off with the first thing it's important to do to stand out as a finance applicant. Do well on the GMAT and GRE. So you may be wondering, well, you just said that we come across as very quantitative. Yes, but because you are in a very competitive applicant pool, you are in an oversubscribed demographic. There are a lot of you, domestically, internationally. You are competing for a spot. If you think about it, of course, business schools want a diverse profile. You are in an oversubscribed demographic. So as you think about the spots that are available, given your demographic, given what you do in your career, there is unfortunately an expectation that you will do well in your standardized testing. And the reason for that is, again, really no fault of your own, but your peers who are in finance, crunching numbers just like you, just tend to score a lot better on the GMAT and on the GRE, and especially on the quantitative side of things. So what I've been seeing more and more so is that a strong GMAT and a GRE score is becoming almost imperative to just even be in the running. And can you get in with a slightly weaker GMAT score? Yes, you absolutely can, but it just gets harder. And when I talk about doing well in the GMAT and the GRE, what do I mean by that? Now, for finance applicants, I really recommend getting, like a 740 plus on the GMAT. If you look at the breakout for the quant, usually schools will want to see a raw score of 49, which is about a 75th to 80th percentile on the exam. For the GRE, you want to be aiming for an 80th percentile or above to really show that, you're essentially checking the box when it comes to this, this sort of stat. And unfortunately, with some candidates who are just really, really strong candidates, with weaker GMAT scores, what's happening more and more is they are being waitlisted. And some schools are saying, look, we'd like you to retake the GMAT or the GRE so we can get really comfortable with sort of your ability. And mainly, just given that demographic, that's just scoring really high. So that's the number one, or I guess, the first thing to really, stand out. So I guess here it's really just to be in the running. You want to do well in the GMAT and the GRE. Now, the second is really to be authentic and to connect the dots in your story. So what does it mean to be authentic? So simply, it means being yourself, right? You are much, much more than a finance professional. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see with finance candidates is really putting a lot of emphasis on what they've been doing professionally. And yes, that is important. It is one piece of the entire pie, but that's not really going to help you to stand out, because everyone who's a banker is working on transactions. Everyone who is in a hedge fund or an asset management firm is analyzing stocks. So how do you start to get away from those normal, tasks and responsibilities that you are involved in and that everyone else in your field is involved in? So one is to draw upon your unique experiences and perspectives to connect the dots in your story. So what you have experienced throughout your life, in school, personally, at the workplace, is what makes you you, right? There's really no other single person in this world who has walked in your shoes, who's had your exact experiences, who has seen the world from your eyes. And so what I recommend doing is thinking about the experiences that have shaped you into the person that you are today, and to jot them down. And if it's helpful, talk to those closest to you to get their thoughts and to make sure that you are capturing the full story of who you are. And are there common themes that emerge as you start to look at those stories? Remember that admissions committees want to understand the living person beyond the two-dimensional application. Now, next, as you think about authenticity, talk about the why. So business school applications are really more about the why than the what. And really even, with finance applicants, even when they focus on what they have done in the workplace, it's, I've done this, I've completed X number of transactions, but there's not much of the why, right? Anyone can talk about his or her experiences and accomplishments, but what will really set an application apart is providing color on why something has been instrumental in shaping you, or why something means so much to you. And this interpretation, and this can apply across your personal life, your professional, extracurriculars, the impact that you've had, the obstacles that you have overcome, the lessons that you have learned, all of these things are what make you authentic. And so your diverse insights will really help you to be a meaningful contributor to your class. And that's why it's really important that the why comes through in your applications, so that the admissions committee can see what you bring to the table beyond just your professional accomplishments, right? We really want to get this complete picture of who you are as a human. And this really brings me to this last point here as we think about authenticity and connecting the dots. While the application is a formal piece of work, you look at the essays, resumes, etc., they should be written in your voice. And so if you have a certain style of writing, don't be afraid to let who you are to shine through, because that's what's going to help to break the ice and help them to see you, help the admissions committee to see you as a person. And although you may get feedback from family members, friends, and yes, even MBA admissions consultants, it's extremely important that you make the ultimate call when it comes to your applications, since they represent you, your accomplishments, and your perspectives. So really, to stand out as a finance applicant, start to think about who you are beyond just the basics. And that has been really critical for my clients, to really help them stand out in the process and get really, really great outcomes. Okay. So here's the next thing. Explain everything in layman's language. So the most common mistake, or one common mistake that I see from finance applicants, is using industry jargon. So NPV, IRR, ROI, WACC, do all of these terms sound familiar? They probably sound very familiar to you, but they are not necessarily familiar to those who are reading your applications. So when you think about any sort of industry jargon, and this is true both in your resume as well as other parts of the application, like essays and data forms, really try to explain everything in easy to understand terms. Really just assume that the admissions committee doesn't know anything at all about your industry. I often say just, pretend you're talking to or writing to a group of, really young kids. How would you explain what you do so that they understand it? And this is also really important because it gets us back to this idea of coming across as human. If you use a lot of industry jargon, the admissions committee won't be able to relate to you. You'll just, feel again, just very, very caught up in your sort of professional life without being able to connect to who your readers are. So that connection can certainly come by explaining everything in layman's language. I always think it's really helpful to spell out the first use of an abbreviation. So if you, say ROI, first spell it out and say return of investment. Then in parentheses, you can say ROI so that if you use the term ROI later on, you have already defined it. And anyone who's reading the rest of your application understands what it is. And as I mentioned, keep this in mind for every element of the application. Doesn't matter whether we're talking about your resume, your essays, your short answers, your data forms. Given the volume of applications that are received, admissions committees, they spend 15 to 20 minutes initially reading through an application. And so if they are struggling to understand what you are saying, they're likely to just stop and not delve any further. And that's just a lost opportunity because you could and probably are a really great candidate, but again, you're just failing to connect with your audience. Okay, and with that, I'm going to just put in a quick reminder that if you're finding this presentation to be helpful, please hit that like button. It definitely is helpful. Okay, so moving on. How else can you stand out as a finance applicant? All right, so get involved in extracurricular activities. So don't underestimate this. Because of the often long hours that are spent in the office, clients with finance backgrounds often tell me that they don't have enough time to engage in extracurricular activities. And unfortunately, the reality is that your competition is finding time to get involved in extracurriculars despite working long hours also. So to be competitive for the programs that you're applying to, it's important to be really involved in meaningful and impactful activities. Now, you may be wondering, okay, here we are, most of us are, if not all of us, are, of course, practicing social distancing. We're not able to go out and get involved in activities. So what I would challenge you to do is to be creative. Can you do things virtually? Can you, think about how you can get involved or help or maybe apply your expertise in some way with organizations that you may currently be involved in or ones, that maybe are seeking some sort of help from professionals as they go through this crisis. Can you be creative and think about how you can help virtually? So you can definitely look at this period as an opportunity. So as you think about your extracurricular activities, take some time to think about your community involvement in college and what you currently may be doing. So college is definitely fair game. Business schools really assess whether or not you will meaningfully contribute to campus life through the activities that you've been involved in. And this certainly includes what you did in college. It, of course, is relevant to what you have done post-college, and it may, and I would say even things that you may be doing in the workplace. If there are things within your company that you can get involved in right now, even virtually, that's often a really great place to start. So just take some time to map out all of the different ways that you have been involved so far in your communities. And as you think about that involvement, it's often helpful just to jot down a few of the questions that I'm about to present to you and introspect. So the first is, what really prompted your interest in those activities? So for instance, in college, what activities were you involved in and why did you get involved? Is there some sort of a theme connecting them? I mean, there may or may not be, but if there is, that can be really interesting to show a really strong passion. Similarly, post-college, have you been involved in any extracurriculars that are similar maybe to those in college, or are they different, and why? And so here again, we're going back to that question of the why, digging in more deeper to understand what's driving you and motivating you. Another question to think about is really to understanding your roles in each of the activities that you've been involved in. So both in college and post-college, what roles did you take on in your communities? Were you simply a volunteer, or did you really step up and did you lead any of those activities? And then finally, as you do that, how have you impacted your communities? Can you point to the results and the impact of what you've done? And that's always something that's really good just to keep in the back of your mind. And so all of this really just ultimately boils down to one very important question. How do you see yourself contributing to business schools? Now, remember, business schools are seeking active members of their communities who will go about implementing change. And in fact, for the past couple of years, one of Wharton's essay questions has focused on this exact topic. The prompt has been, describe an impactful experience or accomplishment that is not reflected elsewhere in your application. How will you use what you learned through that experience to contribute to the Wharton community? And these sort of contributions, can often, especially as a finance applicant, be really powerful if you're thinking beyond just what you do in the workplace. So this question of being able to contribute is a really important one, beyond just what can you bring from your skill set to contribute. And by skill set, I mean your professional sort of endeavors. So now really is the best time to bolster this aspect of your profile. And as I mentioned, just, take some time and try to think creatively. I mean, this really is an opportunity. And just to, give you an example of, a recent client I just worked with this past round two, your typical finance candidate working in the field of asset management, looking at stocks, analyzing different industries. We really spent a lot of time digging in more deeply to understand who he really was and what his extracurriculars were. He did have a lot of, one sort of key passion outside of work, which we focused on, and he'd had impact in that space. And I do think by creating this picture of who he was beyond just this finance applicant, we were able to create, this sort of holistic picture of him as a human. And he was accepted to Columbia, to Booth, and to Wharton. So really, really take this time to, to think about what you can do on the extracurricular side, or if you're already involved, how can you take things one step further? And then as you do that, really, think about, this is really one piece of that multifaceted aspect or this multifaceted piece of who you are, because you are composed of different aspects, and that's really what needs to come through in your applications. Okay, so here is finally one other way in which you can stand out as a finance applicant. Highlight your impact. So there is a tendency for finance applicants to just list their responsibilities and their tasks for each professional role without really pointing to the impact and the results from the different projects and the deals that they've worked on. So as an example, when I look at resumes, from finance applicants who start working with me, usually I'll see things like, okay, worked on this transaction, close this deal. Here's a select transaction or select deal history, and kind of, okay, close this, close that, etc. Or outperform the market by X number of basis points, whatever it is. So I'm getting a lot of the what, but I'm not really getting a lot of the why and the how. So it's really important to focus on the results and the impact, not just talk about your roles and responsibilities. And the reason for that is everyone who is in your type of role in finance has the exact same responsibilities and tasks. So whether you're working at a bulge bracket firm or a middle market firm or a small, really boutique firm, your responsibilities and tasks are typically the same. So what will start to differentiate you? It's digging in more deeply within each transaction so I can get a sense of, okay, how did you start to step up and lead? What were the work streams that you really took a lead on and that really helped to move this process forward? And as you do that, the results and the impact will start to make sense given the effort that you put in and how you actually contributed to that outcome. So hopefully that makes sense. So really, to summarize, you want to convey the why and the how and not just the what. And unfortunately, when I do look at finance resumes, it is a lot of the what. And you're literally going to put your readers to sleep, because it's great that you close a transaction, but how did you go about doing it? Why was that transaction important? Things like that. And that will start to come through in the resume. The essays are a really great, place to start to expand on that. It may make sense, and often does, to point to one or two professional achievements and dig into that to show more of your thought process and how you really helped those outcomes. And when it comes to impact, do this for both your professional and your extracurricular endeavors. Even on the extracurricular side, I'll usually see things like, okay, volunteered in this capacity. Well, that's great. The reality is that 99% of people who are applying to business school are volunteering. But what did you do in that volunteer role to actually, take things further and have impact? Okay. So, as a quick summary, how do you stand out as a finance applicant? So, you want to do well on the GMAT and the GRE. That's just baseline to really just be in the running. Just again, given that you are in a very oversubscribed demographic. You want to be authentic and connect the dots in your story. You want to be able to explain everything in layman's language so that it's easy for your readers to understand and you come across as more of a easily relatable person who the admissions committee can see in the classroom, perhaps helping your peers. Get involved in extracurricular activities. There really is no excuse for you not to be involved in some way or the other. Remember, your competition is doing it. And highlight your impact. Focus on the why and the how to really provide color on what that impact is. Okay, great. So if you're liking the presentation, please hit that like button. So I just want to, spend a couple of minutes telling you a little bit more about Ivy Groupe. So as you know, we are a boutique MBA admissions consulting company. And so I do work with all of my clients, which this does differ from other consulting firms that may pair or match you with a consultant who they think will be the best fit. On the finance side, I can tell you, you won't find many consultants who have actually been bankers or worked in asset management who are doing this as a full-time career. So that's just one aspect that I want to stress here. This is my full-time role. I'm not doing this as a hobby, so this is my full-time role. And so, for me, my clients always come first and they have my full attention. We also have a dedicated advisory board comprised of professionals who have attended top-tier MBA programs, who also have a very deep understanding of the MBA admissions process. Collectively, my advisory board and I were accepted to or received invitations to interview from the programs listed here, for instance, HBS, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, etc. I've also helped clients get admitted to a range of MBA programs, both within the US and abroad, such as Europe. I work with clients across a range of MBA programs, such as the deferred programs, part-time executive MBA programs, etc. We do use a very highly customized approach when working with you. Our process is very collaborative, and I do think this is going to become extremely, extremely important in the age of COVID-19, where my guess is, this is sort of my thought process as we look out ahead to next year, that as we sort of hit a recession, if we aren't in one already, you're going to have more people thinking about going back to school if they end up losing jobs and things like that. And so it's going to become even more and more important for those in oversubscribed demographics like finance applicants to really find those gems or those differentiated angles of who they are to really stand out. We also offer a range of services, so comprehensive packages, which is end-to-end help, hourly services, a pre-MBA package for those of you who may be thinking about business school in the next year or two and not in the upcoming year. And if you're interested in learning more, please feel free to email info@ivygroupe.com. There is an E at the end of group. For more information, you can also just go directly to our website at www.ivygroupe.com, where you can also read a bunch of testimonials, also testimonials on the GMAT Club website. So with that, I want to leave you with some additional resources that you can access before jumping into Q&A. But feel free to sign up for emails at our website at www.ivygroupe.com, where I do provide tips and updates a couple of times a month to subscribers to help them understand the landscape and to stay ahead of the competition. And you can also receive our free guide on the top 6 mistakes to avoid when applying to business school. You can also watch our website or go to our website to watch free videos about different topics related to the MBA application process. And I've done quite a few webinars with GMAT Club on a range of different topics like interview prep and 3 good reasons and 3 bad reasons to get an MBA, etc. So you can find those on the website as well. If you go to the blog tab and then hit the webinar sub tab, you can also find more resources on our product page. There's a presentation on the 5 secrets to maximizing your chances of getting into your dream school, how to craft, a guide on how to craft a resume with an actual sample resume template, an MBA application checklist, which can be really helpful as you go through this process. And definitely feel free to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Ivy_group, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Great. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. All right, so here's a question. I'm a finance applicant applying to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. I've taken the GRE, quant score 169, verbal 157. Should I retake due to the low verbal? So in general, I would say there is a little bit more of an emphasis on the quant than the verbal. But what I would say is, if you have the time, and if you have not retaken the GRE, if you've only taken it once, I don't think it hurts to give it another shot to see if you can get that verbal score up. Now, if you've taken the exam already 3 or 4 times and that score has been pretty constant, it's probably not worth your time at this point. But if you have just taken it once and you're applying sometime, starting from the fall or, next winter, then I do think it's worth a shot just to, take it one more time and see if you can get that score up. Never hurts. Great. Glad you found the presentation to be helpful. Is it harder to get into an MBA if you work in a support role like risk, operations, compliance, and audit? So, great question. I would say that there is probably a bit more, or I should say, it's as you look at the spots, it's skewed more towards those in more kind of front office roles. But I have worked with people who have been in more support roles, and really the principles are the same. What have you done in your role to have impact? Support roles are extremely, extremely important. Organizations wouldn't function without people in roles in, like risk and operations and compliance and audit. And so the onus is on you to really make sure that, what you're doing is coming through, and sort of the importance of that is coming through, and point to different projects that you've worked on, different, endeavors, initiatives where you've actually had a really big impact on making sure that the organization is running really smoothly. So it can be a little bit harder, but it's not impossible. And really it just comes down to those same principles, which is exactly what I've done with others in a similar situation. Could you name some top European and Asian MBA programs known for robust placements in financial services? So as I look at Europe, I would say kind of the most popular one, I would say, for finance is, and also US schools, I would say is London Business School, just given that it is in London, which is a, another sort of financial hub. So that's another one to really think about as you look at finance programs. I would also say schools like NYU, being based, in, or being situated in New York City, definitely really strong in terms of just, finance opportunities to find or to participate, in different endeavors within New York City. Michigan Ross has actually placed quite a few people in finance. As I look beyond that list, those are the two that really pop out to me. So those are ones I'd look at beyond the top 10 if you're looking at finance. So of course, the traditional ones would be things or schools like Wharton, HBS, MIT, Booth. But also NYU is one I'd look at, and Michigan Ross. Is it difficult to get accepted if applying for a second MBA, if the first MBA is not in finance? So a second MBA, it is a little tricky. I think you have to be, again, it's not impossible. People have done it. But you have to be very, very clear about why you are seeking that second MBA. So essentially, what did you not get from that first MBA that is prompting you to pursue a second MBA? So that's one. So the why is critical. You have to be very clear about your goals. That's true of everybody, but even more so for someone who's seeking a second MBA. And really think about the question of, if you were to just go down your current path, what sort of obstacles would you face that an MBA, a second MBA, would really help to clear that hurdle? So you just really have to introspect and be able to answer these questions when it comes to whether or not the second MBA makes sense, and as you position yourself for that second MBA. What do you think about applying for an MBA this year or next year if you are interested in going into banking, an industry that's likely to be even more competitive in the current economy? So that's a difficult question to answer. I can tell you what I think are the general trends that I think I will see. It's tough for me to get into any specifics because no one really knows what the outcome is going to be. Things are just so much in flux. This is, of course, no one has ever experienced this kind of an environment before. But I do think, as I mentioned, I do think applications will likely go up next year as we look at round 1 and round 2 with people getting laid off. So I do think the number of applications next year, and by next year I mean starting from the fall, so the 2020-2021 MBA application cycle for matriculation in 2021, class of 2023. So I just want to clarify that. I do think the volume of applications will go up. I do think it, as an international applicant, I do think that given the situation with visa processing and how everything is essentially on hold, schools will be more amenable and will likely defer international applicants who have been accepted and can't get a visa to the following year. So for international applicants, I do think the environment is going to get more competitive next year because there will be fewer available spots with applicants being deferred, or those who are supposed to start this year now being deferred a year. So there are a lot of, factors to consider, but whether or not it makes sense for any one individual to apply this year versus next is not really a question I can answer in a few minutes. It really requires sort of a more in-depth discussion. I'm focusing on a master's in finance, but why don't top 10 schools offer finance except MIT? Maybe it just comes down to where they want to devote their resources. It's an interesting question. I know there's some really, really great masters in finance programs out there. And I think maybe it's just, how they want to, allocate their resources, maybe being more focused on a general management program instead of focusing their strategy on more expertise or more targeted fields. So I wish I had a more definitive answer, but that's really something that, each school would have to respond to as it comes to their own strategy. What do I think about the Cornell Tech MBA for a career in fintech? I think it's a really, really interesting program. I think it's, one of those things where you're getting that exposure to a particular field, which I think can help you get a leg up over others who may just be technology or just be finance. And so I think from that degree perspective, it gives you a lot more credibility. So I think it's a really interesting program. So work experience of 3 to 4 years in a non-finance background. How does that come across in applications? That's fine. Remember the MBA application process, or if you look at the total number of applicants, it's a very diverse pool of people. So in this presentation, I just focused on one oversubscribed demographic, but being in a non-finance background is fine. It's just really focusing on what you have done and how does that relate in some, if you're interested in transitioning to finance, how does that sort of relate to what you want to do in some way? Can you find those threads to connect the dots? So probably take another question or two. If there are any additional questions. If not, we can wrap up here. Okay, So thank you once again for your time. I hope you have found this presentation to be helpful. Definitely like the presentation, and stay safe and stay healthy. Best of luck with everything.